So let's start. So today, I am going to discuss how we can develop the microservice. So first, let's understand what is the microservice. A microservice is a small application that are designed for the specific task or specific use case. Maybe managing the user record, or maybe microservice are managing the product details, are managing the invoice details. So instead of writing one very big applications, uh, why not we are write independent for the customer management different microservice and have a own database. Okay, and maybe for a product have a different microservice that have a own database. Okay. So here a microservice say, so let us build application on the behalf of the specific use case, not the build entire application in just in one code base, one repository. Instead of that the bigger your application, your might be required the couple of use cases. So for each module or function, you can develop the different service, microservice 1, microservice 2, microservice 3, microservice 4, so that this specific use case can be developed separately. If your application is small, they can easily develop, they can easily test, they can easily deploy. So the microservice concept just uh, help us to decompose our entire business use case in the smaller module or smaller function, and smaller function can build independently as an application. So maybe you can run the customer management service, one is the product management service, one is the invoice generation service. These three services have their own database. They are storing and getting information from database. Okay, and now these are deployed independently. Maybe this is deployed the different server, this is deployed the different server, this is deployed the different server. Okay, sometime your entire application use case say, hey, I need to access data from this microservice. This microservice expose, communicate via each other using the REST API. So in a Python, we can develop the REST API with lots of inbuilt web frameworks. So last session we discussed like the Fast is the framework, Flask is the framework. Similarly, we today we are going to use another framework like Fast API development. So objective is that you should aware of Python's provide the list of web frameworks that help us to build the RESTful API. So today, for example, we are going to use the Fast API web framework that help us to build our application. So that microservice one can communicate to the microservice two, a microservice two communicate to the microservice three. And if your business, your function is very small, the developer can easily develop, developer can easily test and easily deployment. If maybe this service is required to scale, means multiple instances you want to run, the microservice can scale independently. So this maybe you have to run the 10 instances, for this microservice might be the 5 instances. This microservice might require the 15 instances. So each microservice separately deployed in the different cloud, different machine, and separately they can be scale depend upon the use case. So microservice have lots of benefits, but here we're not going to talk more about the microservice. But the objective in a Python, let us you want to go simply build one a microservice. So what the way you are going to build it? So first we have to take our use case and expose some endpoint, a REST API, so that other microservices can communicate you and write your business logic. What are the business logic written, and finally you are storing information in the database. Okay, so for the communicating database, so in the last discussion when we talked about the Flask API, we are writing our SQL query like insert into table value, select a star from. So generally, we as a developer write the SQL query. Okay, and here we are writing our Python code. Python code. So instead of, is it always mandatory to communicate with the database? We have to write the SQL query. So here Python have again the list of, you can say, other approaches. Instead of you writing SQL query, why not let them some library to address your query problem? So for those scenario, we are using the ORM tool, object relationship mapping. So here, instead of writing a SQL query, why not the Python have a define the Python object? We can simply say, hey, Python object, can you go and save in the database? And similarly, get data and ORM convert to the Python object and Python object file. So here the objective that we are going to the build application in a Python, and with the help of Python object we can say, hey, ORM, any ORM library, can you just save my object in the Python? Can you get the object from the Python? So instead of we are going to directly write SQL query on the database, why not again use the third-party library that solve this manually as a developer going to write the query. Instead, Python developer know, yes, I have defined this my object. This object have some attribute and property. Can you go and save the database? And if you want, can you give me this object itself again whenever I require? So here, the way we are going to develop microservice, first we have understand our going to expose REST API and our business logics, what the business logic we are going to do, and storing information we are going to use MySQL, and communication happen via ORM mapping tool. So a couple of things we are going to discuss. Reason is that nowadays, if you are going to build a modern applications, we are use this third-party library to develop REST API, similarly to communicate to the database. Instead of a developer going to write SQL query, instead they can just use the object. Hey, this is my object. Can you save them? Can you get them? Can you delete them? So this is the way we are going to learn. So the overall objective is that we are going to build a small application. Microservice is a small application, independent application that designed for serve the specific one use case. So here let's get the we are going to the build. Which, for building, we are going to the build the REST API, and data is stored in the database, and we are going to write our logic in the Python, and we are going to use the Python library to communicate to the database. Okay, so here we are going to use a couple of code base here for exposing REST API. REST API, we are going to use the Flask API for communicating the database. We are using the MySQL connector, and for ORM tool, we are going to ORM tool to convert our query object to the Python object, Python object to the query, and this is the way we can develop. So let's start. So if you're going to start the application, we have to first whatever the dependency required, we have to install the dependency. So the couple of dependency here we are going to use. One is the FastAPI. This is your Python modern dev framework that help us to build the RESTful API. So for developing RESTful API in Python, there are list of couple of web framework side we have learned, and the last some session we discussed about the Flask. Similarly, today we are going to talk about the Flask. So objective is that all the frameworks similar facility for offer some different additional feature and a pros and cons. And we are whenever we are going to the build my application, so our application must be deployed on the server so that the client can able to communicate So whatever the client, here we can go to the client web browser or maybe Postman or CRUD. These are the client API or UI. They are going to communicate my server. So first we develop our RESTful API application, and then we have to deploy it on a server so that the server are able to run my application and always be ready to receive the request from the client. For that, we are going to use this uvicorn as a web server for running our fast API apps. Okay, and again for talking to the database. So let us we are define some Python object. Okay, and I want to store this information in the database. So generally, previously we have to write the structure query language SQL. Hey, a structure query language and save. Hey, go to the run this structure query language. So instead of writing query, why not directly say, hey, this is a Python object? Can you directly go and save the database? I'm not going to write a SQL query. For those, we have to use again the ORM object relation mapper kind of a library. So here we are going to the SQL AI Chemi आपका library. Those help us to now the Python developer can work on the Python object. They are not going to write a select query, insert query, update query, delete query. Instead of that, Python will say, I have this Python object. Can you persist? Can you get? Can you delete? Now this library help us to do. And one more thing, so we are going to use about the Py uh, dynamic dynamic. So here sometime whatever the client send the request and what the response should be. So how client know ki what is the request parameter, the request is valid or not valid. So request response validation kind of a frameworks we are going to use. This is in a fast API. Use the this also help us to document our API. Someone can go on the browser and open this documentation and check, hey, this is API 1, API 2, API 3, API 4. What are the request parameter? What are the response parameter? Even this Swagger Open API documentation help us. We can execute and test my uh, application. So very handy for the backend developer, because we are not going to develop the front end application. So how someone going to test my API? How someone know what are the request parameter? What are the response parameter? So for that we are going to use this. Surely, whatever the customer information share with us, we have to store in the MySQL. So we need a MySQL Python connector so that your application can communicate to the MySQL. So these are the dependency we are going to use to develop the microservice that with the help of RESTful API that developed by the FastAPI using ORM and MySQL connector to store data. So whenever you are going to install, you can say a couple of library. So one way you can do manually say Python pip install and mention all the one by one your commands and you can install. This is the simplest way. But whenever you have a list is huge, so just make one file and mention all this library and just say, hey, Python pip install and hyphen r and say, make the file name. So there are both way you can install dependency. Just pip install your mention this file and run it, or you can install this command. So let's check this is working or not. So maybe you can just make one dependency. So here let us make one file. Okay, just make a file and just mention the dependency which you want. Let's these are the dependency you want. Okay, so you can just mention these are dependency and these are the description just mention. Okay, okay. So these are the okay. So now this is available, and now you can just go and open the terminal, and open terminal and just run, hey, Python, I'm using Python 3, name pip install, and your file name. Whenever you just run, all the dependencies are going to install. What say? Okay, so dependency.txt. And in this way, they are installed all the library. This way you can do simply you can open a terminal and directly all the mention the Python library. In this way also you can open terminal and just maybe install. This is also we already have installed. They say already installed. Okay, so this is the way you can just install this library. Okay, so fast API for the RESTful API development, uvicorn for just our starting as a server, and ORM mapping and Swagger documentation API. So these are the minimum dependency we require. Okay, so once you install dependency in our application, we have to import dependency. So for importing dependency, just open any file and just import this. Okay, so these are the dependency. We are going to use the fast API, some exception handling, some dependency. These from the fast API again for the ORM mapping. These are the things we are mentioning. So once your dependency done, and let's build my fast my Python application. Okay, so let's develop simply how to start our building API. So first, the whatever the your fast API, you can create the object as an app and give the title name, whatever the title name you want to give, and just develop the API slash whatever the URL you want, and read root and what are the message you want to give. So this is the very simplest way to start developing RESTful API using the fast API. Just create the object and give the title whatever you want, and just now using this app.get, and this is the get API, post API, delete API, and mention the URL, which URL you want. And now you want to test as a server, you can say, hey, I am going to import this model, and say, hey, run this server have a run function, and then say, hey, this is the main my class name main file dot app, this is my app going to start at this port, this IP address, this port number, and reload true. That means anything we are going to the change, always be reloaded. If you run this application, you are able to you can say you are able to run. Now notice this is the port and URL mentioned. You can click here, and now this API you are able to test here. Even if you go, because here we have already included our Swagger documentation API, then you can simply say here say slash documentation. Notice this is my simple title, whatever you mention. This is the open API, and this is my one endpoint is the slash. There is not anything mentioned. And if you want to say get root, so here you whatever the this is the good you can say Swagger documentation gave us the UI, your API name. Even you can run a test API here. Let's try out, and you can say, hey, this is the API, not no parameter, because you have not developed no parameter, and execute, and we are getting this response of a 200. Okay, this is the response message, and this is a complete URL. And if you want to test it from the curl, you can simply use this command curl, and even you test from the command line as well as. Okay, so here from command line also you can test this API. Okay, so this is the response come from you. So Swagger documentation very you can say very standard nowadays for the REST API documentation. For this you do not do more, just you have to tell our fast API library, hey, we are going to use this Swagger documentation. Okay, so let's first we have to understand how to develop my API using the fast. So till now, we have not do any more thing. Just using this fast API, create instance, and just using this variable name, you can expose API. So till now, simply one get API I have exposed and do. So let's do next. You are going to develop some API that's receives some data from the client. So let us we are going to develop our API like our API. Let's post API and customer. Let's put some item detail and they are to send the post. When they are send a post request, we receive one item, and here we are need to develop one post API. Post API receive the object, and I say, hey, this object must be go to the save in the database. So for that, we have to define one object. So what the request would be and what the response would be, we have to going to define what the request object, what the response object, what kind of object I am going to show in the database. So couple of initialization that we are going to do so that we can again say why the customer should know that this is my request parameter, this is my response parameter, and in the database we are going to say, hey, this is my database object going to the save. So whenever you are going to save MySQL database, we have to again connect to the database. So we require some database configuration and require the one session object. Session object help us to save your object in the database. Okay, so let us look how we can do. So first we going to make our database configuration. So database configuration is very simplest way. Here, what we are doing, just say, hey, so we are going to create one here using again one module from the create engine and specify the complete our database URL. Hey, this is the MySQL connector, this is username, this is the password, your IP address, your port number, your and test database. Okay, so we have to go ensure that this database your available. So let's log into the MySQL hyphen u root hyphen the password. So database is so data. So database is this test DB. So whatever the database name here mentioned, you have to ensure that your test database names are mentioned here. Okay. So let us use test DB and so tables. So here the one user table. So notice in this application, we are not going to create any table. Our framework, our application itself going to the create table for us on the basis of model. So let us define what the table name, what the model would be. So here we can just create an engine. From this engine, you can create the one session. So this is the one API from this ORM mapping tool. Create one session. So here understand session is just you can understand if this is a database, this is a database, and our application want to communicate. So whenever you provide this credential, so our applications are able to connect to the database on the basis of your username, password, IP address, post, and database. Okay, so here our if you want to save the Python object, the Python object go and must here save. So ORM tool say, hey, I am going to create one session for you, one session for you. In this session, you send me data, and I am going to save your data in this. The session is just a kind of object that help us to all the object uh, communication between your application to the Python to the MySQL app. Okay, so here, so let's once you define the database configuration, you have to tick database is the what the table name, what the column name, something. Here ORM model we are going to define. Model means here models understand the database table in a Java, sorry, in the Python code base. You can summarize the, you can understand the Python object look like and how your table look like. So here we are going to just say, okay, so here we are going to define just one class, and the class name is item. So this is the Python object. You can say Python object is the item. And in the database, I want to create the table name. So you can say, hey, hyphen table name would be items. Okay. And this Python object have one ID field, one name field, and one description field. Here say ki, what the column. Here say ki, this is the column, ID column, name column, and description column. Here say it should be integer. This is the primary key, and this name is the column, this is the string, and it is the 255 character. Similar description 250. So here we are making database object pythons and database mapping. So this is understand your, this is your Python object. This is the Python object. You can say Python object name is a class, item, ID, name, and it. Three attribute you can define here. And your corresponding database, I want to say, hey Python, this is my table names. Consider this item is my table name. You can mention, hey, this is the table. So here our Python ORM say, hey, in this case, there would be one table. A table have a column. Okay, so here say ki ID is the one column, name is the another column, and this is the other. So here is the attribute, here is the attribute, and the database it's become a your column. So here mention this is the column, and this object Python object become a table here, table. So you can see this is the ORM model. Model means Python object are going to map with your database object. So here in this, just in a Python object, you mention this is my Python object, and this would be a table name this, and this is my Python attribute ID, name, description, and it would be the database column name. And this is the column name, this is the primary key, this is everything. So everything you can here specify your mapping. This is known as ORM mapping. Once you define this Python object, you can say, hey, Python object, this is our notice. Once you engine created, and after that you are created session from, and this is the also we are using the just make our this item as a this connected to this database. You can say, hey, create all and mention your engine. This is the engine. In this engine you are going to register my this item. So our items are registered. Okay, so whatever the mention here, base, you can say, hey, this is the item, my base, and this base I am going to register here. Okay, so third, now what the now we are going to define our documentation. Swagger, what with the request, what with the response, everything, right now. So we are going to now define our request and model was. So whenever, let's give someone going to create item, the create item I can say only required the base model, and this would be name and description only. In the whenever going to the create API, at that time you can say I need the only name and description. And what will be the response? Once you say the item output should be ID and then name and response. This is the base model. Our base model come from the item, name and ID, and additional we in the response you can say what is the ID we created. So in this way you are mapping ORM mapping is a true. So here you are going to map, hey, this is my request, this is my response, and request must have a this kind of it. So here you are going to make the Swagger UI documentation so that our request and response from the UI itself, client can understand. So now we have prepare our database connection. We have prepare our sorry, database connection. Here we prepare our Python object map with a database table, and now here you can say our request and response API detail. What would be? Now we are ready to develop our API. So before going to develop our API, we have to create one database system. Okay, so that our application can directly talk to the database. So here say, yeah, I'm going to get database connection. Here already we define the session local here, session local. So this session local using this engine, you are connecting to this session. So from this session maker, you can get the, here we are going to the try and final block. Here you'll say, once someone call this method getDB, we return this session, and once your activity done, this session is going to your connection is session is going to free, so that another session can be initiated. So this is the way you can manage the database session, so that your application, Python application, can easily make one session with the database, and we are able to store from this db object with a not query but the data Python object. Okay, so let us build our API. So let's create API. Just we're going to build our post API. Okay. So what we do? Okay, hey app create, instead of I'm going to create a post API. This is my URL items, and here you can say response model. This API what return? They return the time out, item out. What is the item out? Item out say this is the item out. What would be your ID a plus base inherited from the name and description. So here is the your mention, hey post API, this is your output. What is the input? You can say, hey, I receive input as a item create. Item create is straightforward. That means item create. What is item create? Item base. Name and description. I am going to receive name and descriptions for creating your item. So here your input. Now our API receive the input, this create item, receive the item, and now I am going to say, hey, I want to save this in the database. So we need a DB session. You can say, hey, I required one DB session. DB session come from this. Now here using this library, this is the library, we are using this library make a session for dependent. The fast API gave us the dependency. Here you can pass the database dependency, so that our fast API can be communicate. Here we are using this dependency and pass the getDB. What is the getDB? This is a method we call here getDB. They return a database session. Now we have a database session. I can say database session dot add and the DB item. Notice this is the item we made. This is the item we created. This is the item we created. This is the. So we are going to create the Python object of this. Where name and description we mention, ID automatically created. Here you can say whatever the input receive here, input receive, just we have an item object, and now we have a db session dot add and database commit and refresh, so that your data is published to the item, and the same database we have to return the item. So now your API is created. So let's check. So refresh this here. Notice one post API is refreshed. And notice this is your URL. And this is the post API. This is the URL. And go check here. This is the parameter. Parameter would be your request body. What is the request body? You can say name and description. Here we mention our request item created. Item created, name and description. This is the string. So here this documentation say this is the name and string. So this is the request parameter. And let's if say here try out, you can just try out. Now you can say item name maybe book, book description maybe storybook. Okay, so this is the So this is your name and description. And now once you send this request, here is the option execute. So now you using this Swagger API documentation, you can send the postman request from the browser itself. So now you can just put here. Okay, just execute them and notice they have created a curl command for me as well as, and now this is our request URL and this is the response 200. Now that means our data are going to store in the database. So let's check our database. So here let's show table. Notice this is the one item table created. Select stare from items. So notice one record is created here. So from here, from MySQL, you can verify, or let's develop the Get API. How to this Get API check from here. So this is the way you can maybe want to create another maybe uh, music. In, in this. Okay. And here execute. So in this way, you are able to notice the data is created. Okay. So the objective here, notice this API receive the database object and just say add and committed the data. Now your this complete, notice the Python object here, we're not writing any insert query, update query, everything is taken care by your DB object. This is the ORM mapping. This is the session local we created, and that help us to save our data in this database. So this is the way we are able to very simple, code is very simple. This is our create API, receive this input, and whatever the input received from input, we can make the Python object. And this Python object say, hey Python object, we have database connection, just go and save and commit. We are not writing any SQL query, something. So let's build our get API. Okay, let's build our get API. Okay. Okay, this is the get API. So get API simply say, hey, I am going to say here app.get get API item name. What the response? Response here say list of item out. Whatever previously response only one thing, here say we need a list. So here our list we are using here to for return list of item. And item maybe here there is a concept of your if your data is too much large, so all the data we are not able to show here in the browser. So whenever you are thinking maybe our database have a million of record, surely million of record you cannot show on the browser. So there is a concept of pagination. I am only first 10 record, yet 20 record I want to display. So this is due to that, hey, I want to from 0 to 10 record only. So you can say, hey, I want to only 0 to 10 record. Default value or you want to change, you can change. This API have a DB session, database session. Database session come from the get DB, and here's a DB.query. I want to query here item. I want to get item. Just mention the our Python object from 0 to this and get all method. So simply say, hey, database query. This is my initial from 0 to limit 10 and give me all the record of this item. I'm not writing any select query. I can say, hey DB, hey database session, I want to query you this item. Give me all the item. Give me all the item. So this API, this is one API developed that take maybe pagination one or two and return the data. Okay, so let's test. Now refresh it. You are getting the one more API get items. So notice here found the try out. So here your parameter you can pass what is the parameter, and here you can say, hey, once you execute, let's execute I. So notice I have get the two record. Okay, two record. So let us, you want to know, I want to 0 to 1 record only. Okay, so here you can get only one record. So this is the way pagination works. Let's you can create one more record. Okay, so let us post one more record. So here try out and paste some cartoon. Okay, and create one row created 200. Okay, okay, let's get all item, and here say 10. So you notice we return. Well, you want to only first only 2 and 3. You can say I want from 1 to limit one record, from 1 to 1. Here from 1 to 1 you can say. Or you want to 2 record, you can say 2. From they are returning a 2 record. So in this way you can very easily implement the pagination from this documentation. Here you are not trying to just say, hey, this is the starting positions from index this, and number of limit number of element you want, they can return, and these are everything taken care by your API. Just if you mention this is the API, this is my output I want. Let's I want to specific one API, read one kind of API. So let us build get one API. Okay, get. So here you are trying to say, hey, I am going to develop one more get API that return the items by the item ID. The item ID you can take as item input, and from item ID you can again using the database session query all the item and filter item id is equal to whatever the item id, and just get first whatever the item id match, then return the item. If item not found, you have to say, hey, item is not found. Okay, if API notice here, just you are using the DB query dot filtering on the basis of ID and then start from. This DB session automatically going to be closed because this is managed by your our code. And now let's check this API, like one more API we get the refresh by ID. So let's here notice here the try out and just say I want to ID 2. So they are give me the data from the ID 2. Maybe I want to pass some ID 5 and get data. So notice item not found because there is a no such ID available. This is your API URL. Your API URL, your IP address, port number, base URL, and ID part. So this is the way you can very simplest way you can test or get one API, yeah, all API. Okay. So let's develop. You want to update the existing one. Let's put API. Okay. So put API also is the very way. Simply you are going to say, hey, item put. I want to put API app that put your API the specific ID you need. This is the ID you read. This is the item ID you receive. And here what the output? Same output I want. And here we are going to the item. Here notice whatever the post API give the input would be your item created. Here you can create the item like a name and description we want right now. So you can say this is our input item, this is the body, and you can say this is databases. So in this update API you need your ID and the particular item detail you want to post and the database connection. Here say, hey DB, query this particular ID exists or not. First find out a database the particular ID may exist. If not exist, throw exception item not found. If item exists, so whatever the item name I receive, I receive the name. What the item data description receive item descriptions, and finally whatever the DB we updated its name, updated its description, and after that you can say commit the record and refresh the session. Session flush means whatever the information in particular session have, they are going to the flush in the database. So this is the way you can create the update API. Just you query all the item and filter the particular ID. If ID exists, edit the ID name and description and commit the data and refresh the database. Okay. So if you again refresh here, you are getting a one more put API. Put API required one ID. So let us put edit here, try out, and here say let us I want to ID. Wait, let's say I want to 6, and I want to update maybe updated item item updated updated description. Let's see, this is the ID. If first we check the ID exists or not. Okay, and let's execute. So notice here the record is, notice item is not found because whatever the detail you mention here, the particular item is not exist. So we have to let us find out the ID which we want to update, the get API. Let's try out and test it. So let us, we are going to update this ID3. Okay, minimize this. Let's see ID3. Okay. So here ID3 we are going to change the updated name and updated descriptions, and we can set the request. Once you send the request, this is the your curl API, your, and this is the your response body 200. Okay, that means they are successfully updated. Okay, and even you want to check by ID, check by ID. Let's try out with the ID3 and get the detail. Notice we are getting the updated record 200. Okay, and even if you want to check all API, get all, and notice in all as well as our response body say, hey, this data are also updated. And even you want to check in the database, even you can check in the database, all these are the records are updated. So this is the way, very simplified way of Flask API help us to build microservice based REST API, very simplest way. Now we are not writing any kind of a structure query. Like it's just one time you provide the database configuration and your database and Python model. Just you configure, and after that you just use this particular DB query and all the operation you can do. Okay, so let us build like maybe one more delete API. So this is our delete API and delete it. Similarly, say hey app.delete the items, and this is particular item ID want to delete. So this is my item ID. The first you have to say hey database query the item tables and filter out the item ID is input item ID match or not. If match, get the first one. If this is the found, you can say data not found. If found, just say db.delete. We're not writing the hey database delete from table where ID. I'm not writing query. Say hey db, whatever database session we have, just say delete, and you can say db commit a message item are deleted. So let's refresh this page. Notice one more delete API you are published. Go here and pass the ID. Let's pass the ID particular and delete them. Notice here say item not found. Let's want to delete the item ID 3, and you can delete them. The item is deleted successfully. So let's test get by ID 3 found or not found, item 3, test it, and notice item is not found. Even you can check for all item, try out all the, so notice still item 3 is removed. Even you can check from the database, the particular item 3 are removed. So you can say very simple way we are able to build one microservice that expose the create API, post API, delete API, simplified way. Here you can say develop the API. Notice this is the create API, this is the get API, get one API, put API, and delete API. And the code very simple. We are just using the DB session to perform all the operation. We are not going to write any query. Just initially, you have to just configure, hey, this is my database engine from which we are going to connect from this session maker, they give you one session local. This session local object, this is the session. Notice this is the get method. You can say, hey, this is a session local. This is the DB one session created, and all the database operation. Notice the like DB operation, like a DB dot add, dot commit, dot refresh, all the API you receive. You want to query DB dot query and mention which table, means you use Java model. Here you can say Python model item, and you get the query. And after that, you can apply filtering and other parameter. So you notice this is the very you can say very simplest way this fast API as a web framework for the Python allow us to develop REST API, and even our API service can easily integrate with the ORM tool and the Swagger API, Swagger documentation, so that anyone want to ensure that our API, what are the requests, what are the response, everything you can get from this. But you can say slash doc doc. Here you can find well documentation. Even from your post API, what the input, what the output, you can mention here this is the input and what would be the output, what would be the validation, everything you will find. And even more detail, you can go here, all the your what the input types, here mention our input type. What is the output type? Here you mention output type. These are the things, these are the schema, these are the schema we already define in this. Just this is the way simplest way. This is the way schema you define. Whatever your model, whatever the input you want, whatever the output you want, you can define. This is my input. This is my output. This is the, because you want the same input and output, you can either inheritance here, you can define the super base model. And how our this class become a model, this is, notice here you can in the inherited from base model. Notice base model come from this library. So whenever you just whatever the your input object you want to make a Swagger API documentation, just make the your base model inheritance from the base model, and base model come from this library. Similarly, for a database, you can say, hey, this is my base model. I can, whatever the database, this is my base model. I inherited. From this base model, we are going to say, hey, this is my item table. This is the database base model, and this is my table name. This is my column name. All the detail you answer. And now just say, hey, our base create all the database is found with this engine. So this is a similar simple one-time configuration, and after that you have to develop complete your post endpoint using the just db.add and your item object. Similarly, get API, db.create an item, and get all the record. For first, db query and filter with ID match and get the first one. Put API first check ID exists, then update the value, and you can say a commit. And there is a small code, simplest way to develop, and you can just test it. So now you have developed one microservice with a very simple one file, and you can just deploy this code anywhere. Now your API is ready to receive requests and response. This documentation available, any client, any other application, any UI application can use this Swagger documentation to know more detail about our API and do the development of the UI as well as. So this is the things you can say very simple way. Use the fast API web framework to develop the microservice based RESTful API that communicate your application with the database with a Swagger and ORM tool. So these are the some points which I have, which I want to convey you, and hope this information is helpful for you. If you really want to make some practice, a good option, you can just do practice. Just try to hear what we do. We develop our REST API, REST API, written our code in Python, written our code in a business logic in a Python, and a Python object via the uh, library, ORM library connected to the MySQL. Here we are just working on a Python object, and our all the API are documented by the Swagger doc. Okay, so all the requests, response, anyone can so very easily integrate the Swagger OpenAPI documentation, your Python object, ORM tool, in your MySQL to connect database. And these are the all the operation create, update, delete you created. So now your application is ready, your microservice is ready, deploy them, and now your Swagger documentation also available. Anyone can consume the Swagger documentation and understand the API request, API response, all the API details, and they can validate, and all the things are implemented very simply. So just let's do practice of this way, and you can a very simplified way develop the microservice using the fast API web framework for the Python, and we have used the ORM and Swagger documentation to develop the complete microservice. So that's the point I have for the day. Thank you.